Hey guys, welcome back to today's video. Today is Saturday, October 23rd, 2021, and today we're going to be taking a look at President Joe Biden's approval rating and the fact that the majority of the country today disapproves of the job that he is doing as President of the United States of America. The numbers have only gotten worse for Joe Biden. Months ago, he was riding high with a plus 10 approval rating nationwide, and today he stands at negative 7.3% across the nation, and this is super significant. Beyond FiveThirtyEight, Real Clear Politics puts him at an even worse position with a negative 10 disapproval rating nationwide with the overall net spread, with 52% of the nation disapproving of him and just 42% approving of him. This ultimately is harming the Democratic Party's chances of victory in 2021 and 2022, and consequently will lead into 2024 as potentially being a very poor year and poor wave years in 2021, 22, and 23 for the Democratic Party. Now, looking at FiveThirtyEight, I would begin to trust this one a little bit more, mainly because they are able to weight and average their polls a little bit better than Real Clear Politics. For instance, in Real Clear Politics' average, they pretty much take every single poll at service level and don't adjust for historical inaccuracies or the overall sampling bias. You can see here that there are very different polls. Back-to-back, Reuters and Ipsos did a poll that was during the same time period as the Trafalgar Group poll, yet some of them, they have completely different results. The Trafalgar Group poll showed that a negative 19-point disapproval rating was net average for Joe Biden, and Reuters was negative 2. Now, about even in between the two is where we currently stand nationwide, but the fact that there was such a wide gap amongst nearly the same amount of voters amongst the same time period, it is just fascinating to see. But on FiveThirtyEight, they're arriving at a very similar conclusion. It may not necessarily be, negative 9.8%, but it's negative 7.3% nationwide. But the reason why I would begin to trust this one a little bit more is because they actually adjust for the inaccuracies, for the polling errors, for pretty much everything that they have done. The main point of this adjusted number is to adjust it to match the national demographic group. Go into the poll, take a look at whether or not they've actually represented the nation as they said they have, and consequently adjust accordingly. Now, no matter what happens on both the Real Clear Politics side or FiveThirtyEight side, you cannot arrive at any other conclusion than the fact that Joe Biden is at the worst point of his entire presidency today. Being down 7.3% is absolutely nothing that can be even considered good for the Democratic Party or manageable. This is not a manageable approval rating. This was manageable for President Trump, largely because the majority of the nation, while some of them may have voted for him, still disapproved of his job that he was doing as President of the United States. So when you see Joe Biden down 7.3%, this is a very different situation because Joe Biden did not start out in the same way Donald Trump did with the approval rating being in the negative. Joe Biden did not start out with the favorability rating being in the negative. Joe Biden pretty much had a standard type of political entry and ultimately was able to ride that wave for over 6 months in the overall approval rating nationwide. But now it's down to a very, very bad point. And it isn't just Joe Biden that is starting to see the repercussions of this approval rating dip. You can see that in the favorability rating, he fares better than any other type of top notable name across the nation. But one thing in particular you might notice is that Democrats ultimately go down as a result. Nancy Pelosi is at negative 20. Chuck Schumer is at negative 15. You can see that even Vice President Harris is at negative 10 in terms of the favorability rating. Donald Trump, however, is at negative 8. So for the first time throughout the entirety of the presidency, Donald Trump has a higher approval rating and higher net number than Vice President Harris does in terms of the favorable/unfavorable polls. President Trump is performing better than Vice President Harris. And I think that many people might have expected that, but this is the first time we've actually seen it happen. And it isn't just the favorability ratings. It isn't just the approval rating that seems to be deteriorating for Joe Biden, but also the impact of this is dragging down Democrats beyond Vice President Harris. For instance, in the 2022 generic ballot, you have started to see Republicans take the advantage in some of the more recent polls. The Federalist and the Quinnipiac University poll show Republicans ahead by 1 and 3 respectively. In addition, the highest you see Democrats lead is +8, when before that actually was pretty routine in 2020 and 2018. You can see that there are very big differences between the polling numbers in 2018 and 2020 versus 2022. In addition to that, previously speaking, the only poll that had showed that Republicans ahead was this one that is being calculated by the Federalist, but Quinnipiac is the one that I really wanted to point out, because it had the Democrats ahead by 9 back in May, it narrowed down to a 4-point advantage back in September, and then all of a sudden now, Republicans take a 3-point lead. It is very fascinating to see the 12-point swing amongst the American electorate, but to be completely honest with you, it makes a little bit of sense. Back when that poll was taken back in May, you can see here that President Biden was approved of by over 10 points nationwide. If he's down by 7, and when that poll was actually taken, he was down by just a few points, you're talking about a reduction of nearly 12 points. In fact, more than 12 points. And that's the exact swing you see on the generic congressional vote. But it's not just the generic congressional vote. It also goes into very otherwise not so competitive races. For instance, the state of Virginia, which yes, inevitably could have gotten closer than it was in the past, but Democrats were riding high. They have maintained a lead ever since polls have begun to been measured in the state of Virginia. In fact, very few numbers actually show that Glenn Youngkin maintains an advantage over Terry McAuliffe. But you can see here that in the most recent numbers, the approval rating with Joe Biden's approval rating dipping, the amount of Democratic support in the state of Virginia has also decreased. I mean, it started out in an okay position when Joe Biden was still disapproved of back in August, but as the months went on and as the approval rating got increasingly worse or worser, you can start to see how it narrowed up and narrowed up and narrowed up to a point where now it only shows Terry McAuliffe ahead by 1.8%. 1.8% statewide when Joe Biden won the state by 10, when Mark Warner won the Senate election by over 10, when Tim Kaine won this race by over 15, when even, Ralph Northam won his race by 9. This race is a race that the Democratic Party needs to win because it's their race to lose. And if they do lose it, that will be what the GOP mentions and utilizes for the 2022 midterm elections. And I'm telling you now, after covering the 2018 midterm elections, that type of energy, that type of enthusiasm, knowing that you can win on occasion and trying to ensure that it becomes a constant reality is something worth fighting for. It was something the Democratic Party fought for in 2018 and got, and I can see the same thing happening for the GOP in 2022. But you can see here that the approval rating pretty much in terms of Joe Biden and also maybe some other top officials, with that deteriorating, it is dragging down the other officials in the White House and also Democrats, whether on the generic ballot, whether in Virginia, and this can also be applied to the state of New Jersey. Phil Murphy, the incumbent Democratic governor, started out with a Rutgers poll that showed that he was ahead by 26 points statewide. That narrowed down to a 15-point lead in June with the Farley-Dickinson poll, which makes a little bit more sense. Phil Murphy won by 13.3% of the past. Monmouth University in August said Murphy would win by 16. Okay, that seems to be okay. And then in September, he reduced by 3%. Then by later September, I guess a few days after, Stockton University at the same time did a poll that shows that Murphy's only ahead by 9 points. And then today, in the most recent poll from Emerson College, Phil Murphy only maintains a 6-point advantage over Jack Ciattarelli. That is something that is absolutely insane. When you take a look at the average of the 3 most recent polls, Phil Murphy winning by 9 seems to be the new reality. The RCP average actually overestimated his support back in 2017. So when I see this, I view it as the narrowing up of an otherwise previously very safe governor election, but it could end up being more competitive than we actually thought. But as you may have guessed by now, it goes beyond Virginia, it goes beyond New Jersey, and even into upcoming 2022 races. For instance, in the state of New Hampshire, new polling data seems to indicate that what was a Chris Sununu lead by 2 in February, reduced down to a 1-point lead in July, has now tripled to a 3-point lead in October. Now, I do want to say that you can start to see the amount of people that have seemed to push away from voting for either candidate. Chris Sununu was at 49%, now is at 45%, and Maggie Hassan was at 48% and now is at 42%. But the reality of the situation is people are less likely to say they're voting for Republicans than Democrats on a poll in a state like New Hampshire. I mean, you have people who are clearly against President Biden that may have voted for him back in 2020 that want to display such discomfort and such discontent with the President of the United States, and they were able to do so in this poll. But all around here, I mean, it's going to show that Joe Biden's deteriorating approval rating is is only benefiting the Republican Party, and they need to do something fast. In order to combat this, the Democratic Party should try to change the narrative and pass pieces of legislation that make Joe Biden look like a popular figure. Because no matter how hard they campaign in Virginia, or how hard they campaign in other battleground states and spend money on states such as New Hampshire and make it a $200 million Senate race, at the end of the day, if Joe Biden is disapproved of to the same extent he is today, you will start to see the Democratic Party fall apart for 2021 and especially 2022. Because when you take a look, it already has. In terms of the Senate elections, this was earlier on in the year. The Democrats started out winning 51 Senate seats in my projection, moving all the way up to 52 in my one back in June. And then as the months went on, it didn't change in July, but then all of a sudden, the approval rating switched. And then things started to narrow up. And then from there, the approval rating switched even more. And consequently, Joe Biden was unpopular by this point in time. And today, now that we have our most recent numbers from the beginning of October, you can see that Democrats are starting to lose their grip on some of these states. States that were previously characterized as likely back in March of 2021 are now considered to be tilt. States such as Colorado and Arizona have moved over from their previous characterization, and states such as Wisconsin, Pennsylvania, and Georgia and New Hampshire have all moved over in terms of their previous characterization from from Democrat to Republican. So when you take a look at the breakdown by Senate election and also the direct responses from the American public on certain groups, certain people, in main retaliation to President Joe Biden, this gives the Democratic Party a lot of understanding about where they stand today. Joe Biden did have a honeymoon phase, and I never denied that. I said, though, inevitably that Joe Biden would be unpopular because he wants to return to a sense of normalcy. Well, part of that normalcy is accepting that you have a negative approval rating. I mean, it happened to George W. Bush. It happened to Barack Obama. It happened to Bill Clinton. It never didn't happen for Donald Trump. It happened to George W. Bush. It happened to Ronald Reagan. I mean, you can see here that in every president in United States history, at one point they were above, and at one point they were on the bottom. But the only person who actually breaks that stereotype is the President Donald Trump. He was able to be disapproved of the entire time and consequently did not win his re-election bid. So all in all here, what do I see? I see the Democratic Party down 7 points. Not necessarily just Joe Biden, but yes, the Democratic Party. As you can see in states such as Virginia, that are very important states for the upcoming governor elections. New Jersey, another one of those states. You also have this examined in the United States Senate election from the state of New Hampshire. This type of rhetoric clearly is working. In terms of the generic congressional vote, Democrats only maintain a 2.3% plus average. Keep in mind, last time Democrats won by 3.5%, and Republicans were able to keep control of many of those otherwise competitive Senate races. You know, looking at the generic congressional vote, looking at everything that these new numbers have sort of given us and sort of caused in retaliation and response to should scare the Democratic Party, because looking at the upcoming elections, it doesn't look too hopeful. My governor election projection in the state of Virginia and the state of New Jersey put the Democratic Party in the advantage, but not enough to be safe. I've moved over New Jersey into a closer column for the Democratic Party, working on my governor projections that I'm going to be releasing in just a few days, and then I will release a projection for the state of Virginia and also the state of New Jersey. I'm very interested in how this politics is going to work out, because at the end of the day, I think that one person is going to see a direct response to and retaliation to, regardless of what the result is. If Democrats aren't winning Virginia by 10.1%, they haven't won it the same way that Joe Biden did. And I think that that is going to warrant a lot of criticism towards Biden. This moral victory that Republicans will inevitably get actually might not be, because the California recall election was meant to be some type of election that ensured some type of moral victory. It did not give them one. They actually lost it by a larger margin than Gavin Newsom won by in 2018, a Democratic wave year, might I add. But the point being that, you know, New Jersey and Virginia are going to be narrower than we expected. And I think that at the end of the day, it is something that many Democrats should look at and say, is there a possibility that Glenn Youngkin wins Virginia? Is there a possibility that Jack Ciattarelli wins in the state of New Jersey? And the one person they primarily have to blame for all of this anguish, all of this pushing down of, key pieces for the Democratic Party is Joe Biden, because the American public begins to disapprove of him in ways that they have not before. This puts the Democrats in a tricky position because they haven't recovered, they haven't rebounded yet, they haven't re-entered into the honeymoon phase, and at the end of the day, Joe Biden is going to have to do something to earn the support of these voters back again. He's going to have to pass major pieces of legislation, sponsor many important things for the American public, because if he doesn't, the public will still continue to turn on him and will still continue to shy away from him, as they will not view him as someone who is working by and for the people. The president's office, the Oval Office, is one of the most influential bodies and one of the most influential buildings in the entire world. And Joe Biden at this point in time has a big letter F in terms of the grading system from the American public as to how he's handling his job as president. For someone who used to be up by 10 points nationwide and now is down by 7.3%, it is a very interesting situation of how the mighty have truly fallen when it comes down to favorability rating. However, there is certainly time to rebound. Every president who has been at this point has rebounded in one way or another, so that will certainly be a very interesting point of interest, and we just want to track this over time, and we will catch back up as to how the approval rating is for Joe Biden in about 2 to 3 weeks, and I think that it might be a little bit different than what we see today. So thank you guys so much for watching this video. Make sure to comment down suggestions below. Subscribe on the left if you haven't already, and check out the Instagram and Twitter. At the bottom left of the screen, there's also a Discord server for you to go ahead and join. On the screen, there's a video you can watch, and then a playlist for my 2021 election analysis videos. Again, thank you guys so much for watching, and I will see you all tomorrow.